Welcome to Model Philosophy. My name is James. Today, hedonism, Slaanesh, and the search for meaning. At the beginning of the Great Crusade, Fulgrim and the Emperor's children were after something good, even holy. They wanted to be perfect, not for pride, not for glory, but to honour the Emperor's vision of a united, enlightened, and glorious humanity. Their quest considered virtuous. Fulgrim was praised for his refinement, his obsession with excellence, and his search for beauty. They weren't going down, they were going up. But the road to greatness is dangerous, especially when greatness has no end, and when Slaanesh whispered from the edge of consciousness, promising not just perfection, what had once been good turned into something else. This isn't a story about how dangerous pleasure can be. It's a story about what happens when you forget why you enjoy things, when refinement turns into need, when seeking turns into worship. This essay examines that transition via Fulgrim's demise, Slaanesh's emergence, and the enduring struggle of philosophy and literature with this distortion. Hedonism, when properly understood, was never about going overboard, but somehow it always ends up there. I'm making these foot soldiers blunt weapons of ecstatic war that are the first steps on a path that leads to madness. People won't remember them, but without them the stars have no stage. We don't start this journey with Fulgrim, Lucius, or the Noise Marines, but the tormentors and infractors. They're the first to be put together, the lowest in rank, and the first to die. We start with the ones who scream loudest and die fastest. They're not brave, they're what it costs to be ambitious. A distorted blueprint of hedonism. In history, we find a kind of plan, a framework that came before the problems of a complex society. Philosophy, particularly in its nascent stages, sought to confront life's challenges with lucidity prior to the entanglement of the world in bureaucracy, status, and spectacle. Epicurus was the first to talk about hedonism, but it didn't take long for people to get the wrong idea. Stoics and later Christian moralists described this as a philosophy that encourages gluttony, lust, and self-absorption. They thought that pleasure was always close to sin. But calm balance doesn't get much attention, or many demons. It's always been hard to hear what Epicurean hedonism has to say. It's not exciting. It doesn't turn into orgies or craziness. It's about being at peace, about being calm, about not having any physical or mental pain. It's a way of thinking that values being happy over having things. But stories and myths, hedonism is never calm. It always ends badly, a play. What about now? Hedonism is its own brand, dopamine, with a brand name shipping right away, right to your doorstep, scrolling without end, 1,000 voices telling you to want more and more. This isn't what Epicurus had in mind. It's a hunger that never goes away, sold as freedom. If you read the old text again, like Epicurus's boring, patient vision, you would never think of Slaanesh. True hedonism, as philosophy, doesn't make excess look good. It asks if you think about pleasure or not, with intention or neglect. The fall through perfection. The Emperor's children were aiming to be perfect. The Adeptus Astartes 3rd Legion, the sons of the Primarch Fulgrim, proud, noble, and dedicated to perfecting their form, strategy, and self-control. Warriors trained to be disciplined, artistic, and perfect. The Emperor of mankind found Fulgrim on Kamos and brought him back to Terra. He was put in charge of only 200 of his legion's surviving members. He gave everything he had to the Emperor's vision to prove that he and his gene seed were worthy. Not just strength, but also grace and overwhelming power, not just loyalty, but also excellence above all else. Fulgrim and his legion were obsessed with this goal. Their way of fighting became art. They were proud of how beautiful their actions were. After that, the need to be perfect became an obsession, and once the obsession set in, the lines between fun and work started to blur. The climax came when Fulgrim took a relic blade after defeating a Xenos world of Laoran, while leading the 28th Expeditionary Fleet's campaign in the Great Crusade. Slaanesh, the Chaos God, took Fulgrim and whispered to him in the deepest parts of his desire, not just glory, but divine perfection, not just greatness, but going beyond. And Fulgrim, he followed. The birth of Slaanesh, Eldari, is civilizational hedonism. Where did Slaanesh come from, if the Emperor's children follow her? What kind of god could use pleasure as a weapon? Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, the Lord of Excess, the perfect Prince, and the Eldari call her she who thirsts. The Eldari were the first ones who let the Chaos God into the world. In uncontrolled search for pleasure and excess, turned slowly into a psychic presence in the warp, a growing force that came from their shared excess. Over thousands of years this presence grew stronger, feeding on their growing decadence, until it caused a disaster. Their civilization fell apart in one night of unimaginable evil. A psychic explosion that killed billions, rippled apart the fabric between real space and the warp, made the Eye of Terror, and gave birth to Slaanesh, eating the souls of the Eldari and destroying their empire. Slaanesh was born of too much pleasure, not just hedonism, but the worst version of it. Slaanesh would not be welcome in an Epicurean garden. She would eat the olives, tear down the trees, and turn the fountains into a mirror of her perfection. And yet she is what many people would now think of when they think of hedonism. Not happiness, not being at peace. They would think of it as need. Slaanesh as a need, the end of meaning and disorder. At the end of the hedonic treadmill, Slaanesh is there, the never-ending search for art, beauty, stimulation, perfection, excess, breaking the rules. Fear did not get the best of Fulgrim. He wasn't fooled. He accepted Slaanesh. Fulgrim was gone. Delight became his religion. Every feeling, whether it was pain or joy, became his truth. Slaanesh's role in the Warhammer universe. Slaanesh is more than just a god of pleasure. Of all the gods in the Chaos pantheon, she is the most dangerous. Not because she's strong or unyielding, but because she is the most alluring. Khorne wants blood as a tithe. Nurgle wraps you in the false comfort of decay. But Slaanesh doesn't come with force. She whispers with what you already want, turning it into its own trap. There is no fight or pressure. The invitation is enough. The Eye of Terror, a wound in the galaxy, was not opened by war, but by pleasure. Slaanesh was born when the Eldar Empire gave in to that desire. It was an explosion so big that it destroyed their souls and their civilization. Slaanesh didn't attack people like other gods of chaos. Instead, she came from within. The Eldar didn't fall because they were conquered. They fell because their hunger turned inward and ate their souls. Slaanesh is different from the other ruinous powers, not because of lies, but because of recognition. The temptations presented are not alien. They're recognizable spectres of what already resides within their heart, within our heart. Khorne rage turns into death, and Nurgle turns fear into decay. Slaanesh, on the other hand, only makes what you want to do when nobody is watching. To fall here is to be drawn by your own image, and this is why Slaanesh is the most dangerous. When the other gods come, they bring destruction. But when Slaanesh comes, she brings beauty. The mask is flowing, the music is intoxicating, and the feeling is heavenly. You can only see what's left after the spell has worn off, a hollowed-out ruin where life used to be, with beauty burned to ash by the same hand that gave it. And as I paint these tormentors and infractors, I'm building the bottom level of our cult. They're not the winners, they're not elite, they don't get picked, they're cannon fodder. But you can still see Slaanesh's influence in their gilded armour, curved blades, and exaggerated shapes. I am holding the manifestation of corrupted hedonism, which is the opposite of Epicurus's peaceful garden. They serve as a philosophical admonition. When pleasure becomes an end in itself, it consumes the soul that pursues it. Literary and cultural mirrors. This pattern can be seen in more than just the 40k universe. For a long time, literature has warned about what happens when we chase pleasure without meaning. If there were prophets in the 40k universe, Slaanesh would be the high priest of Marquis de Sade. He didn't warn about giving in, he was happy about it, adored it. His writing, he broke down moral pretenses and said that pleasure was the only law that mattered. But aside from the man who coined the term sadism, not many people really want unlimited pleasure. We see characters who try it and fail more often. Not many people support the idea of always looking for pleasure. We do look into this in literature where characters look for pleasure as the end goal. Dorian Gray stays beautiful but loses his soul. Gatsby's happy and bright, but he's still empty inside. Patrick Bateman has everything the world says we should want, but nothing ever touches him. These stories are not sermons, they're reflections. They show us what happens when pleasure is not based on truth, love and meaning. These stories are Slaaneshi, but they don't take place in the warp, they take place in our own world. Philosophers and artists often play with the idea of too much, especially when they've been upset about moral codes. They remind us that freedom is important, that being held back is not always a good thing, and that life is meant to be lived, to see how beautiful life is, to feel deeply, to risk passion even though fire is burning. They remind us that trying to find beauty is an important part of being human. It's not weak to want to feel the world in our short lives. It's what makes us human. Philosophical thought throughout the ages predominantly asserts that pleasure is not intrinsically negative, but rather unrestrained pleasure is. Epicurus envisioned a life of ataraxia, a constant tranquility, where uncomplicated joys, communal dining and serene contemplation provided liberation from suffering. Aristotle believed that the middle path and thought that the virtue was not found in extremes, but in the right balance between them. John Stuart Mill even went further, saying that not all pleasures are equal, and that higher forms of mind and spirit should be valued more than short-lived pleasures. The same pattern happens over and over and over the years. Balance, proportion, and discernment. Pleasure does not have to be bad if it's linked to a goal, but when it becomes its own goal, it falls in on itself and eats itself until there's nothing left. In modern psychology, the constant search for pleasure is known as addiction. In myth, too much pleasure turns into arrogance. In the 40k universe, the god of Slaanesh has raised the Legion Emperor's children, who gave up on honor for excess and excellence and self-worship. Pleasure by itself doesn't give meaning, but repression doesn't work either. Meaning is found in integration, moderation, reflection, and creation. And that brings us back to painting. Painting is not a luxury, it's attention, it takes discipline. It's the intentional shaping of something lovely, one stroke at a time, finding happiness through hard work, not through too much of it. And as I'm painting the tormentors and infractors, I'm thinking about how different it is to celebrate feeling something than to be overwhelmed by it. This is model philosophy. Thanks for being here.